You're going to delete my promotion request like I'm some intern who accidentally CC'd the wrong person. Vivian said it without even looking up from her phone, just tapped that little trash icon like she was flicking lint off her blazer, and my 18 months of documented achievements vanished into the digital void, with the same enthusiasm she reserved for declining lunch invites. I stood there in her glass office, watching my career aspirations get dragged to the recycle bin while she scrolled through what looked like vacation photos from her third Cabo trip this year. The irony wasn't lost on me that a woman who once called a staff meeting to discuss proper emoji usage in Slack threads had just nuked my future with a single finger swipe. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just watched the cursor blink where my carefully crafted promotion proposal used to be the one I'd spent 3 weekends perfecting while he was probably getting drunk on overpriced margaritas and complaining about how hard it is to find good help these days. Vivian finally glanced up like she'd just remembered I was standing there breathing her recycled office air. "Look, honey," she said in that tone that makes you want to check your bank account for bail money. "We've talked about this. Your timeline is a little aggressive. Maybe revisit this conversation in 6 months when you've had more time to develop your leadership presence." My leadership presence. The same leadership presence that had carried the Morrison account through a near catastrophic client meltdown last quarter while she was in a mindfulness retreat, learning how to breathe through her privilege. But sure, let's talk about development timelines from the woman who still hasn't figured out how to unmute herself on Zoom calls. I nodded, smiled that corporate smile that tastes like battery acid and broken dreams, and walked out of her office with my dignity intact and my rage carefully packaged for later delivery. Because here's what Vivian didn't know about timelines. Sometimes the universe has its own schedule, and sometimes that schedule includes a stranger in a coffee shop who's about to hand you a contract that turns your boss's condescending timeline into her worst nightmare. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to the beginning when I still believed hard work and documentation could overcome nepotism, and a boss who treated promotion requests like spam emails. Hey, if you're following this corporate horror story and nodding along like you've lived it, hit that subscribe button because 97% of you watch these videos and don't subscribe. And honestly, that's almost as painful as watching Vivian delete 18 months of my life with the enthusiasm of someone canceling a dentist appointment. I started at Hartwell Industries as a project coordinator, which is corporate speak for someone who does everyone else's job while they take credit for breathing. The Morrison account was supposed to be routine, a mid-sized manufacturing client looking to streamline their supply chain. Nothing glamorous, nothing complicated, just good old-fashioned logistics work that pays the bills and keeps the lights on. Except Morrison's previous account manager had apparently been running their operations like a drunk toddler. With a crayon set, purchase orders were duplicated, inventory was scattered across 3 different tracking systems, and their billing cycle looked like someone had fed their Excel sheets through a paper shredder and then tried to reassemble them during an earthquake. I spent 6 weeks untangling that mess, working nights, weekends, and one particularly memorable Tuesday when I didn't leave the office until 3 a.m. because their entire Q3 shipment had been routed to the wrong distribution center. Vivian's contribution to this crisis management masterpiece was forwarding me passive-aggressive emails about time management and asking if I needed help staying organized. Meanwhile, I was basically performing surgery on a supply chain with nothing but determination and an unhealthy amount of caffeine when Morrison finally stabilized when their CEO called our firm to personally thank us for saving his quarterly numbers when their contract renewal came in at 140% of the previous year's value. Vivian scheduled a team meeting to discuss our collective success. She used words like synergy and collaborative effort, and thanked everyone for their dedication to excellence. She mentioned my name exactly once. Buried in a list of contributors like I was the intern who refilled the printer paper, not the person who had resurrected their entire operation from the digital dead. But I documented everything. Email chains, project timelines, client feedback, cost savings, metrics. The whole beautiful paper trail of competence that should have made my promotion request as undeniable as gravity. Except gravity apparently doesn't apply to people like Vivian who exist in a reality where merit is optional and favoritism is a renewable resource. That night I went home to my studio apartment, opened a bottle of wine that cost more than I should have spent, and stared at my laptop screen until the cursor started blinking in Morse code for help I could transfer departments. But Hartwell Industries isn't exactly known for its internal mobility, unless you count moving from one form of corporate purgatory to another. I could job hunt. But the market was tighter than Vivian's grip on her ego, and starting over somewhere else meant leaving behind the Morrison relationship I'd spent months building. I could also do what every reasonable person does when faced with systematic workplace injustice, which is absolutely nothing. Drink wine. Complain to friends, and hope karma eventually shows up like a late Uber driver, but karma had other plans. Karma had a name, and it was sitting at the corner table of Henderson's Cafe, nursing a black coffee and reading what looked like a very boring contract. At 7:23 the next morning, I was in line behind a guy ordering a drink that sounded more like a chemistry experiment than coffee, when the woman at the corner table looked up and made direct eye contact. Not the polite acknowledgement you give strangers, but the kind of eye contact that suggests she knew something. I didn't. "Excuse me," she said. After chemistry guy collected his molecular caffeine creation. "Are you the one who handled the Morrison turnaround?" I stopped breathing for a second because that's not the kind of question strangers ask unless they're either stalking you or about to offer you something that's too good to be true. I looked around the cafe like maybe she was talking to someone behind me, but no, she was definitely talking to me. The woman who looked like she could negotiate world peace before her second cup of coffee. "I am," I said carefully, trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate corporate espionage or if I was about to become the protagonist in a very weird LinkedIn success story. She smiled and gestured to the empty chair across from her mind. "If I steal 5 minutes of your morning. I'm Claudia Brennan from Apex Strategic Solutions, and I've been watching your work." I sat down. Because when a stranger says they've been watching your work, you either run away screaming or sit down to hear the pitch. And I was too curious to scream. Apex Strategic was a consulting firm that specialized in what Claudia called operational resurrection, which was a fancy way of saying they fixed companies that were too broken to fix themselves. They had a client, a mid-sized tech firm called Pinnacle Dynamics that was hemorrhaging money through supply chain inefficiencies and vendor mismanagement. Their current logistics setup was apparently held together with hope and zip ties, and their leadership team was about 3 bad quarters away from becoming a cautionary tale. In business school textbooks, "We need someone who can walk into chaos and build systems that actually work," Claudia said, sliding a folder across the table. "Someone who's proven they can take a disaster and turn it into a success story. Someone like the person who saved Morrison's entire operation while their boss was probably getting spa treatments and calling it professional development." The folder contained an offer letter for a senior logistics consultant position. Salary was 60% higher than what Hartwell was paying me. Benefits that didn't make me want to cry. And something called performance bonuses, which was apparently what happened when companies actually rewarded competence. But here's the part that made my coffee taste like victory. The contract included a clause that would give me equity in any operational improvements I implemented. Meaning, If I fixed their supply chain and saved them money, I'd get a percentage of those savings, not as a bonus, not as a gift, but as a legal entitlement written in ink and enforced by lawyers. I stared at the offer letter like it might disappear if I blinked too hard. "This is real?" I asked. Like someone who'd been living in corporate purgatory for so long that actual opportunity looked like a mirage. Claudia nodded completely. "Real. We've been tracking your work since the Morrison save, and frankly, we're tired of watching talented people get overlooked by managers who couldn't organize a filing cabinet." I looked around the cafe at the other morning commuters rushing off to jobs where their contributions would be minimized, their ideas would be ignored, and their bosses would take credit for anything that didn't end in lawsuits or public relations disasters. "When do you need an answer?" I asked, already knowing what that answer would be. Claudia smiled like someone who'd just won a poker game with a royal flush. "Take your time," she said. "But Pinnacle's bleeding about $50,000 a month in operational inefficiencies, so sooner is better for everyone's bank account." I took the folder home that night and read every word of the contract twice. Then I read it again with a magnifying glass and a law dictionary, because when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. But this wasn't too good to be true. This was just what happened when competent people recognized competence and decided to do something about it. The equity clause was legitimate. The performance metrics were clearly defined, and the escape clauses were reasonable, meaning if this went sideways, I could leave without being sued into oblivion. The only question left was whether I had the courage to walk away from the devil. I knew for the angel I didn't. But first, I had to resign from Hartwell, which meant facing Vivian one more time and delivering news that would probably make her choke on her morning smoothie. I scheduled a meeting for Friday afternoon because if you're going to burn a bridge, you might as well do it when everyone's already thinking about the weekend. Vivian was in her usual form, scrolling through her phone while I sat across from her desk like a defendant waiting for sentencing. "What's on your mind?" she asked without looking up. Like my time was an inconvenience, she was graciously tolerating. "I'm resigning," I said. Clean and simple. No preamble, no explanation. Just the kind of direct communication that makes middle managers break out in hives. Her head snapped up so fast I thought she might have pulled something. "You're what resigning?" I said again, because apparently the first time hadn't registered 2 weeks' notice. "Effective today." She blinked slowly like someone trying to process information in a foreign language. "But you can't resign. You're in the middle of the Morrison contract transition. You have responsibilities." She said the word responsibilities like it was a legal document that bound me to her ego for eternity. I smiled, the kind of smile that tastes like freedom and feels like justice. "Morrison will be fine," I said. "They have my contact information and all the documentation they need. The transition is already complete. I just haven't told you because you deleted my promotion request before I could schedule the handoff meeting." Her face went through several colors before settling on a shade of pale that suggested she was finally understanding the math. If I left Hartwell, lost the Morrison relationship. If they lost Morrison, they lost their biggest client. If they lost their biggest client, she lost her bonus and possibly her job. "You can't do this," she said, like she was negotiating with the laws of physics. "This will destroy the Morrison account." I leaned forward just enough to make my point clear. The Morrison account will be fine. They're excellent clients, and they deserve better than being managed by someone who deletes promotion requests like spam email. But here's the thing about consequences. They don't care about your timeline or your comfort level. They just show up when they're ready. I stood up, shook her hand, like we were concluding a business transaction, and walked out of Hartwell Industries for the last time, taking my dignity, my documentation and Morrison's phone number with me, because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting equity. Pinnacle Dynamics looked like every tech startup that ever convinced investors they were one algorithm away from changing the world up in floor plans, standing desks, and enough kombucha in the break room to pickle a small village. But underneath all that venture capital optimism was a supply chain disaster that would have made Morrison's problems look like a minor accounting error. Their inventory system was so fragmented, it looked like someone had taken a perfectly good spreadsheet and fed it through a wood chipper. Their vendor relationships were managed through a combination of sticky notes and prayer. And their logistics coordination consisted mainly of hoping things would magically appear where they needed to be when they needed to be there. I spent my first week just mapping the damage, like a crime scene investigator trying to reconstruct how everything had gone so spectacularly wrong. Purchase orders were being processed through 3 different systems, none of which talked to each other. Shipping routes were determined by whoever felt like calling the trucking company that day, and inventory tracking was handled by an intern who'd been promoted to logistics coordinator because he once successfully ordered office supplies without destroying the budget. It was beautiful in the way that natural disasters are beautiful if you're the person being paid to clean them up. Claudia introduced me to the team as the person who was going to fix everything, which was both empowering and terrifying. Because when you're the fix-it person, you become responsible for every screw that stays loose, every process that doesn't improve, and every dollar that continues bleeding into the void of operational incompetence. But I'd been fixing things my entire career. The only difference was that now I was getting paid appropriately for it, and my boss wasn't going to delete my documentation the moment it became inconvenient. The first system I rebuilt was their vendor management protocol, which had been operating on what I can only describe as the hope and vibes methodology vendors were paid whenever someone remembered to pay them. Purchase orders were approved by whoever happened to be standing near the approval stamp, and contract terms were negotiated by people who apparently thought due diligence was a fancy French phrase. I spent 3 weeks building a vendor portal that actually worked automated approval workflows that prevented purchase orders from disappearing into bureaucratic black holes, and contract management systems that tracked everything from delivery schedules to payment terms to performance metrics. The kind of boring, systematic competence that keeps companies profitable and employees employed. 6 weeks into the Pinnacle project, their operational costs had dropped by 23%. Their vendor compliance had improved to the point where suppliers were actually meeting delivery deadlines, and their inventory accuracy was hovering around 90%, which was approximately 90% better than when I'd started metrics like that. Don't lie, and they don't play favorites. They just sit there in spreadsheets and quarterly reports proving that competence is measurable and that some people are actually worth their salaries. But the real victory came during my second month when I got a call from Morrison CEO asking if I'd be interested in consulting on their expansion into West Coast markets. Apparently, they'd heard through the supply chain grapevine that I was available for special projects, and they had some challenges that required someone with a proven track record of turning logistics nightmares into operational dreams. I took the call from Pinnacle's conference room, looking out at a view that didn't include Vivian's condescending smile or the beige walls of corporate mediocrity. The Morrison contract was worth 6 figures in consulting fees, plus a percentage of any cost savings I generated, which meant my little side project was about to pay me more in 3 months than Hartwell had paid me in a year. But the sweetest part wasn't the money. It was the email I sent to Vivian afterwards. Professional, courteous, and absolutely devastating subject line. Morrison account. Transition update. Followed by a brief note explaining that Morrison had chosen to work with me directly on their expansion project, effective immediately, and that they'd asked me to recommend a replacement account manager for their ongoing relationship with Hartwell Industries. I attached Morrison's official letter of transition, which was written in the kind of diplomatic corporate language that politely explains why they're firing you without actually using the word fired. And I copied the entire Hartwell leadership team because when you're delivering news like that, transparency is important. I hit send at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday because timing is everything in corporate warfare. My phone started ringing at 8:23 the next morning. Vivian's name flashing across the screen like a distress signal. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to 3 minutes of barely controlled panic disguised as professional concern. She wanted to discuss the Morrison situation. She wanted to understand my decision-making process. She wanted to explore opportunities for collaboration, and she definitely wanted me to reconsider the transition timeline because apparently, even when you're no longer her employee, she still thinks she can manage your schedule. I didn't call her back instead. I forwarded her voicemail to Claudia with a note that said, "Former boss requesting consultation on account retention strategies. Please advise on appropriate hourly rates for crisis management." Because when someone spends 18 months treating you like you're disposable, they don't get to demand your time for free when their incompetence finally catches up with them. The Morrison expansion project turned out to be exactly the kind of challenge that makes you remember why you got into logistics in the first place. Complex enough to be interesting, straightforward enough to be solvable, and profitable enough to fund a lifestyle that doesn't involve calculating whether you can afford both groceries and gas. In the same week, the project started with a site visit to their existing West Coast warehouse, which looked like someone had let a tornado organize their inventory system pallets, stacked with the structural integrity of a house of cards. Shipping routes that meandered through half the country like a drunk GPS and a receiving dock that processed incoming freight with all the efficiency of a government DMV. I spent the first week just documenting the chaos, taking pictures that looked like evidence from a corporate crime scene, and building spreadsheets that revealed how much money was bleeding out through pure operational incompetence. Their shipping costs were 40% higher than industry standard. Their inventory turnover was so slow it had basically achieved geological timescales, and their order fulfillment accuracy was hovering around 73%, which meant 1 in 4 customers was getting either the wrong product or a lovely surprise package of pure disappointment. But underneath all that dysfunction was a distribution network with serious potential good location, decent warehouse space, and a staff that was clearly capable of excellence if someone just gave them systems that actually worked. I spent 8 weeks redesigning their West Coast distribution network from the ground up, starting with vendor negotiations that would have made Vivian faint from the sheer volume of actual competence, involved rerouting shipping lanes to eliminate the scenic tours their freight was taking through unnecessary states, and building automated inventory systems that could track a paperclip through a hurricane. Their old system required 3 different people to confirm that a box had been shipped. Their new system generated automatic tracking confirmations that customers received before the delivery truck had even left the parking lot. By the time we launched their new fulfillment centers, their cost per shipment had dropped by 31%. Their delivery times had improved by 2 full days. Their order accuracy had jumped to 97.3%, and their customer satisfaction scores were high enough to make their competitors wonder what kind of magic they'd discovered. The magic was called competent project management combined with systems thinking and a healthy respect for the laws of physics. But I wasn't about to spoil the mystery for anyone who hadn't figured that out yet. 6 months after leaving Hartwell, I was sitting in my new office in Pinnacle's headquarters looking at quarterly reports that showed operational improvements worth roughly $2.8 million in cost savings and efficiency gains. My equity stake in those improvements had just vested, which meant my bank account was reflecting the kind of numbers that used to only appear in my most optimistic daydreams and my accountant's most conservative nightmares. The Morrison consulting contract had led to 3 additional clients, including an aerospace parts distributor whose inventory system made Morrison look organized, and a pharmaceutical logistics company that was hemorrhaging money through expired product write-offs at a rate that would have made a Las Vegas casino blush. 2 more supply chain projects were already signed, and an invitation to speak at the National Logistics Conference about operational turnaround strategies was sitting in my calendar like a monument to the power of documentation and competent execution. My LinkedIn profile now listed me as Senior Director of Strategic Operations at Pinnacle, with additional consulting credentials that actually meant something in rooms where million-dollar decisions get made quarterly, and my email signature included certifications that open doors instead of getting lost in spam filters. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. I'd moved from my studio apartment to a 2-bedroom condo with actual counter space and a view that didn't include anyone else's laundry. My car was less than 5 years old, and when I went to restaurants, I ordered whatever sounded good instead of calculating whether the appetizer would put me over budget for the week. But the real satisfaction came from the industry newsletter that landed in my inbox. That Tuesday morning, buried on page 4, was a small announcement that Vivian Patterson had left Hartwell Industries to pursue new opportunities in retail management, which was corporate speak for she got fired and was now probably explaining to teenagers why they couldn't return items without receipts. The announcement thanked her for her contributions to the team and wished her well in her future endeavors. Using the same generic farewell language they probably recycled for every middle manager who'd finally exceeded their incompetence threshold. I didn't celebrate her downfall because I'm not that petty, but I did save the announcement in a folder labeled Natural Consequences next to the screenshots of my first Pinnacle paycheck and the Morrison contract renewal, because sometimes the universe keeps better records than HR departments. That evening, I got a text from an unknown number turned out to be Claudia, who'd heard about Vivian's departure through the professional grapevine and wanted to know if I'd be interested in consulting on a new client acquisition project. Apparently, word was getting around that I could fix supply chains, and my reputation was starting to generate the kind of referral business that turns consultants into industry experts, the text said. Heard about your old boss, thought you might appreciate the irony. Also have 3 new clients asking specifically for you. Can we discuss rates over coffee tomorrow? One of them specifically mentioned the Morrison turnaround and wants to know if you can work the same magic on a manufacturing supply chain that's currently operating at about 60% efficiency. I replied, coffee sounds perfect. Also, yes. I appreciate irony, especially when it comes with equity and performance bonuses, and tell the manufacturing client that 60% efficiency isn't magic, it's just Tuesday. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting promoted to the point where your former boss's career trajectory becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when you delete other people's dreams and forget that competence is transferable, but loyalty isn't, and that market reputation travels faster than office gossip. The next morning, I drove past Hartwell Industries on my way to coffee with Claudia. The building looked smaller somehow, like a place that used to seem important, but had been revealed to be just another stop on someone else's journey toward actually mattering in the bigger picture of professional achievement. In the parking lot, I could see the same cars belonging to the same people who were probably having the same meetings about the same problems they'd been having when I left. Except now they were having them without me and without Morrison, and probably without the quarterly bonuses they'd gotten used to receiving for work. They didn't actually do. I didn't slow down, didn't turn in, didn't feel anything except gratitude for the stranger who'd handed me a contract in a coffee shop and reminded me that competence doesn't have to be a secret, and that sometimes the best promotion comes from the person who recognizes your value, not the person who deletes your requests. Thanks for sticking around. You legends of the cubicle maze, hit that subscribe button, and let's make your old boss wonder what they missed when they underestimated you. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply being too successful to notice them anymore.